It's Friday, July 11th. Let's talk PlayStation. Very exciting news week. A lot of stuff to talk about. A lot of stuff happened, so let's start it up. So, Shuhei Yoshida was in an interview, as he always often is, and he revealed that the White Glacier PlayStation 4 is actually going to be available this fall, standalone in Europe. So if you don't want that Destiny bundle, you do have an option to buy it standalone in Europe in fall. He did not say anything else regarding other territories, but there is that. So, another PlayStation 4 bundle was actually announced this week, a Driveclub Bundle, so kind of saw that coming. It seems like any major game that ever gets released ever from now on is going to have a PS4 bundle. So if you have any sort of interest in buying a PS4 in the next 5 years, and you want it with one specific title, chances are you're probably going to get it. Alright, so let's touch on this little quick rumor, and that's what it is, very much so a rumor. It's one of those industry insider things, and I only include these because we know that that particular insider has been correct before, but I know they're getting a lot of shit nowadays. Industry insider Teased, who has been right in the past, that's why I'm mentioning it now, was tweeting a few interesting things about Sony possibly purchasing Crytek. Now, if you did not know, past few weeks, we haven't talked about it because it's really more of a Microsoft story, but Crytek has been having a lot of trouble recently. Employees are not getting paid. They were going to work on Rise 2, but that got canceled because Rise 1 didn't do too well. Not a lot of developers are using the Cry engine, which is what Crytek does. So basically, it's bad news at Crytek. So Sony is apparently looking into possibly purchasing them to see if it's maybe a good business move on their part, if they can maybe acquire them and make money off of the deal. This is one of those stories where it's not going to be considered true until it actually happens, and this is a pretty big kind of like rumor, like, you know, the acquisition of Crytek, a multi-million-dollar, I mean, it probably cost a couple billion to purchase Crytek, so who knows if this is actually going to happen. I'm going to say no, clearly, but I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, it's true that Sony's looking into it, but we would never know if Sony's looking into it and not buying it. You see what I'm saying? So, but there's that. Okay, so let's talk about some video games, or more so the possibility of certain video games. Guerilla Cambridge has posted a job listing for an audio programmer. Now, this is pretty standard. You know, developers need audio programmers, but what's interesting is that in the description for the job, it specifically states that the person getting the job would be working on a multi-million-dollar high-selling franchise. That would, you know, that would make you think, okay, well, it's an existing franchise, clearly, and Guerilla Cambridge is well known for being under Guerrilla Games. Guerrilla Games does Killzone. That's one of their biggest franchises. So could Guerilla Cambridge be working on the next Killzone game? Because Guerrilla Games is currently working on a new IP, which is rumored to be a open world RPG. So you might have Guerrilla Games working on a new IP, Guerilla Cambridge working on the next Killzone. Seems like it makes sense, but we don't know until we actually get an announcement from them. It was also going around this week, or at least we were getting more evidence, that Beyond Two Souls is possibly going to be coming to the PlayStation 4. Now, a while ago, somebody on NeoGAF found inside the game's portfolio a line of code kind of like dealing with the PlayStation 4's DualShock 4 controller, which would make you think, okay, well, maybe the game's going to come to PS4. Well, now two German retailers have listed the game for purchase. I believe both listings have been removed, but either way, it's like more evidence, and we've discussed this a few times. If a retailer listing comes up, multiple retailer listings, and then you've got other evidence and such, and it's been a big trend recently that PS3 360 games are getting ported over to PS4 X1 with bumped up resolution and frame rates. This seems pretty reasonable. Like, this is probably going to happen. The game is being dubbed as Beyond Two Souls Director's Cut, probably going to have some extra scenes in there, make some good use of the PS4's touchpad, and it'd be kind of a good in-betweener for Quantic Dream while they're continuing to work on their native PS4 project. So let's get back to Shuhei Yoshida. He was in an interview with Eurogamer talking about the possibilities of an Uncharted Trilogy coming to PlayStation 4. He basically said it would be a good idea. He didn't confirm it or anything like that. Of course it would be a good idea, but what's interesting is that from his end, he's saying that 50% of people that bought a PlayStation 4 did not own a PlayStation 3. Now, I'm assuming he's getting that statistic from PlayStation Network IDs. If somebody signs up to PSN and it's the first time they're signing up, it would be on PS4. They don't have pre-existing trophies with their profile, things like that. And I could believe that because a lot of people are just now jumping into PlayStation with PS4. And that's kind of the reason why they're doing The Last of Us on PS4. So, interesting that there are that many new people joining the ecosystem, and I'm assuming they're definitely looking into possibly bringing Uncharted to PS4, and that is something I would totally buy. It's, you know, it's crazy. We're getting all these ports and remasters, but the damn thing is they're good games, so I would totally play them, and I would totally buy them and play them again for sure. But as I've often mentioned to you guys, if you don't like constant ports and remasters, be a consumer and don't buy those, because then Sony might pick up on the fact that people aren't buying them. But people are buying them, so that trend may keep continuing. Moving on, do you remember the game Until Dawn? It was announced back at 2012 Gamescom. It was a PlayStation Move title for PlayStation 3, kind of like a horror game where you take Move and you're walking through a cabin, you got all these teenagers and they start dying one by some killer. Well, it's been gone for a while, we already know that. We were wondering where it is. Basically Sony re-trademarked the game, and they re-trademarked it under sort of a new description for the game, I guess. Now, them re-trademarking it means that, you know, they definitely want to keep the property, and chances are the project's still being worked on. And the last time we talked about this, I assumed, and many people are assuming, that this game is getting ported to PlayStation 4 and possibly being used with Project Morpheus, which seems like a good fit. Well, the new description makes it sound like it's even more that's even more of a possibility, adds more credibility to it. The description for the game is now listed as downloadable computer graphics and horror and entertainment images, or some crap that I'm probably going to put a picture of in front of right now so you can see it better than I can describe it. But yeah, seems like that's definitely more likely now. Moving on to another game that we haven't heard about in a while and we want to actually happen is Bioshock for PlayStation Vita. Holy crap, yes, there's no news about it, which is that Ken Levine, the creator of Bioshock, has tweeted that he still wants to do the game, but lawyers and all that. He wishes he could do it himself, but lawyers and all that. Now, if you're wondering why he can't do it himself, it's because you know, 2K owns the Bioshock name. It's their intellectual property. He can't just make a Bioshock game unless he gets permission and he needs funding, and you know, it seems pretty self-explanatory. I probably shouldn't have to explain it to you, but yeah, you can't just get up and start making a game like that, especially if it's owned by somebody else. So he wants to do it, but there's still just it's like I said, it's not even news. Like, it's still not happening. So I want it to happen, though. A man can dream, can he? Now, this next news story is probably just for me because I'm like such a huge Motorstorm fan, but somebody tweeted Jamie Brayshaw, who is currently the senior community manager at Evolution Studios, about the possibility of another Motorstorm game in the future. And Jamie replied back saying, maybe in the future, but right now they're currently working on Driveclub. And, oh man, just hearing about the possibility of a Motorstorm game on PlayStation 4 it's mouth-watering to me. But that's pretty much it. Just a tweet back to fan inquiry. It's good to know that it's a possibility. I love the games. I love the Motorstorm games so much. Does anybody else like them as much as I do? Because I'm all about them. Alright, now that we got possible game announcements out of the way, let's talk about Shuhei Yoshida a third time. I really paced out this show in a weird way. But he was in Barcelona doing a panel at Game Lab, and he discussed a lot of interesting things about kind of the business model that Sony does regarding, you know, funding and releasing games. Now, we all know Sony usually funds... Sony tends to fund a lot of games that, at the end of the day, probably aren't going to be huge commercial successes, and you kind of have to wonder if they really do see money back on these titles. What he talked about was that he basically said, in a nutshell, 3 to 4 out of like 10 games that they fund will actually make money, and 1 or 2 of those games out of the 3 or 4 will make so much money that it covers the costs of 10 games. This is just an example he's using, but basically he's saying that a lot of the games that they fund ends up not, you know, they don't see a return out of it, they don't see profit out of it, which I can totally believe, by the way, because Sony does that a lot. They do fund a lot of games that are not commercial successes. And he kind of detailed it further with, you know, the kind of usual PR stuff that he's going to say, like, you know, we want to, you know, support teams that we really believe in. We want to get, you know, we want to fund the right projects and everything. And even if it is kind of like PR bullshit, I mean, it's more or less true, because that is the fact of what they're doing. They do tend to fund and publish a lot of games that might not end up making money. And we talked about this, like with PlayStation Vita, for example, and why you don't see a lot of games from Sony put on Vita anymore. And it's probably because they lost a lot of money on a lot of Vita games, especially some of the AAA titles like I would assume Tearaway or Killzone Mercenary did not make money. I would assume, because those games looked like they were pretty demanding in terms of development costs, and they did not sell that many titles, that many copies. But pretty much all makes sense for sure. But it's just interesting to hear him say just how many titles end up losing money. Now you might be asking yourself, why would they do this if they do lose money? And I guess it's more so of, you know, if they have all these attractive titles to entice people to buy PS3s, PS4s, PS Vitas, and you know, it takes one console sale from one person to make that one person start buying multiple PlayStation 4 games, even if it's not those specific titles that Sony funded. If they end up buying a bunch of PS4 games, that's money in Sony's pocket, even if they didn't buy the ones that end up losing money. It's just kind of a interesting look at how Sony operates in terms of funding their games and everything. Our final news story is really kind of like the last news story. It's just a lot of random facts and details and interesting things that we now know about Sony and how they operate. There was the develop conference this past week. Mark Cerny and Andrew House were there. Mark Cerny, PS4 architect. Andrew House, the president and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment. So the really interesting thing that came out of this conference is what the PlayStation 4 could have been once it actually launched. Now, the system could have possibly launched with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, we knew this a while ago, that Sony was going to originally ship the system with 4 gigabytes of RAM, but they upped it to 8. But the system also could have launched without a hard drive and instead flash memory, so the system would be really speedy and fast boot up times. The system was also apparently going to launch with a camera in every box. Now, we also knew that, but the reason why ultimately they ended up taking that out is because they increased the RAM to 4 gigabytes and they decided to include a hard drive with every system. And that kind of broke down costs for that. To add another 4 gigabytes to the system, it would have cost Sony in the end $1 billion. To add a hard drive to every system, it would have cost Sony $1 billion. They did both these things, so they spent a lot of money to make the PS4 what it is today. But they looked at all these things and they said, something's got to go if we want to not lose a shit ton of money here. And they said, okay, the camera will be removed from every PlayStation 4 and the camera will be an accessory from this point on. Andrew House also talked about why Sony announced the PlayStation 4 before Microsoft. Now, this conflicts with what Kaz Hirai said a long time ago, saying that they would let Microsoft make the first move. Kind of really makes you wonder why he ever said that, because Andrew House has now revealed that them announcing first was very deliberate. They wanted to be the ones to announce first. And his basic reasoning was that they wanted to have a leadership position. They wanted to come out of the gate. They just wanted to kind of be the forefront of the next generation. And clearly they've done that so far. But kind of makes you wonder what the PS4 would be if it came with a camera in every box, 4 gigabytes of RAM, no hard drive, and it was announced after Microsoft announced the Xbox One. Who knows? We could be in a completely different scenario. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. Be sure to check out this week's episode of Ryan on Gaming. It feels weird pointing at nothing, but I'm clearly going to put a picture here when I'm editing. This week's topic was, should price matter in a game review? So when you go to IGN, GameSpot, or hell, when you're watching one of my reviews, should price matter in a game review? Be sure to give that a look to see my opinion on that topic. And remember, please submit topics if you have a good one. If you want to hear me talk about a specific topic in the video game industry, please let me know. I've been writing down a whole list of like certain topics that we'll do in the future, and so please submit any if you have some. That about does it for me this week. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you so much for talking with me, and I'll see you all next Friday.